It was a quiet, almost ordinary night. The kind where everything feels still, and you can almost hear your thoughts over the hum of your car engine. But that night, nothing was ordinary. I had just wrapped up a long day at work, tired and frustrated, and the last thing I wanted was to take the highway home. So, I decided to take the back roads, something I'd done hundreds of times before. The moon was barely visible, and the only light came from the headlights of my car cutting through the darkness. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. I was just about halfway down the road when I saw the flashing hazard lights in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a car that had broken down. It wasn't unusual to see people stuck on these desolate roads, so I slowed down. I considered stopping to help. Maybe they needed a jump or someone to call a tow truck. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. There, standing in the shadows, was a man. At first, he seemed to be bent over, doing something by the side of the road. I couldn't quite tell what it was. Was he looking at something, rummaging around? Then the headlights of my car hit him fully, and I saw it. It wasn't just some man standing there. He was eating. His hands were digging into something, and the blood that smeared his face made me freeze in place. It wasn't an animal like I had hoped. It was a body, a human body. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching on the asphalt. My heart was in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't look away. His eyes met mine, empty, hollow eyes, like he wasn't even human anymore. He didn't flinch, didn't even seem startled. Instead, he smiled at me, a slow, twisted grin, his teeth red with blood. It felt like time stopped, and my breath caught in my chest. I didn't know what to do. But then he stood up, and that's when I realized he wasn't walking toward me. He was running. Before I even had time to react, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The car jerked forward, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror, but I could feel his presence behind me. The sound of footsteps pounding on the road, growing louder and faster. I could see him in my mirror now, his grin still stretched wide, his legs moving in a way that wasn't quite human, almost like he was hunting. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles went white. I pushed the car harder, faster, until I reached home. But when I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling. It wasn't over. That night, as I locked the doors and double-checked the windows, I felt something shift. Something was wrong. The house was quiet, but too quiet. As I sat on the couch, clutching the bat I kept in the closet, the sounds of the night seemed louder. Every creak, every gust of wind felt like it was building to something. And when the motion sensor light by the garage flicked on around 2 a.m., I froze. Peering through the blinds, my heart stopped. There was nothing there. Or was there? A dark shape, just out of sight, seemed to linger in the shadows. And in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Whoever or whatever was out there was still coming. And I was next. The worst part? I wasn't sure if I could survive what was coming next. The next few days passed in a haze. I tried to go about my life as if nothing had happened. I went to work, kept up appearances, but it felt like I was walking around in someone else's shoes. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see his face. The man in the road, that grin, the hollow, soulless eyes. The image haunted me at every turn, but I told myself I was just shaken up, that it was just some random lunatic. There was no way he'd be back, no way he could follow me here. But every time I thought I had shaken it off, I'd see something. A flicker in the corner of my eye, a shadow that lingered too long. I started noticing things around my house that didn't belong. Footprints, fresh, muddy prints that led right up to my door. I didn't see anyone, but they were there. Every morning, They were there. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or a neighbor's prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It couldn't be. I called the police again, but they couldn't do much. They sent an officer out to inspect the tracks, but after a few minutes of poking around, he gave me the same tired line. Probably just some kids. I wanted to scream at him. Kids? What part of this felt like a prank? But I didn't. I just nodded, thanked him, and closed the door behind him. I was starting to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. What if it was all in my head? What if I was just imagining things? But the next night, it happened again. The motion light flickered on. I was frozen, staring at the blinking light like it was a warning, like it was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I grabbed the bat from the closet and crept to the window, heart racing. My breath hitched as I peeked through the blinds. I didn't see anyone at first. Then just as I was about to breathe a sigh of relief, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow, moving slowly across the yard. I felt my heart stop. There was no mistaking it. He was back. I could see his outline, that twisted figure standing just beyond the range of the floodlight. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other through the glass. The distance between us felt like miles, but I could feel the weight of his eyes on me, pressing down, suffocating me. My throat went dry. Suddenly, he moved again, closer this time, his silhouette crossing the yard with a steady, deliberate pace. I stepped back from the window, panic surging through my veins. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced. Was this real? Was this a dream? I couldn't tell anymore. I locked the doors and windows, even though I knew it wouldn't be enough. I grabbed my phone and dialed Jessica's number, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't explain what was happening. How could I? How could I tell her that I felt like I was being hunted by something I couldn't even understand? What if she thought I was losing my mind? She'd probably try to help, but there was nothing anyone could do. Not if this thing could just show up out of nowhere. The sound of something tapping on the window downstairs broke my thoughts. It wasn't a knock. It was too gentle, too deliberate, like something was testing the glass, trying to see if it would break. My stomach turned, and I couldn't move. I stood there frozen as the tapping grew louder, moving from the living room to the kitchen, then to the bedroom window, just like before. My breathing quickened. I didn't know if I should leave, if I should hide. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The fear was so thick I felt like I was choking on it. There was no escape, and deep down, I knew it was too late to run. Whatever he was already inside my head. I could hear the tap, tap, tap of his fingers against the window. Slow, calculated, like he was enjoying the sound of my fear. I didn't know how long I stood there, frozen, but it felt like hours. My legs burned from not moving, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept telling myself to move, to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. The sound of the tapping stopped. I exhaled shakily, but that moment of silence didn't last long. Instead, I heard a scraping noise from the side of the house. Someone was dragging along the siding, moving methodically, as if studying the house, figuring out where I was. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying this was some twisted dream, hoping I'd wake up any moment. But when I opened them again, I knew it was real. I grabbed the bat and crept to the living room, my pulse racing. The shadows from the outside flickered in the streetlights, making it look like there were more than one of him. My mind raced. Had he brought others? Was he just playing with me? Or was this something bigger, something worse? I didn't know. All I could focus on was the sounds that kept growing louder, getting closer to the back door. The phone in my pocket buzzed, breaking the silence. I jumped, almost dropping the bat. It was a text from Jessica. "Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you all day. Call me when you get a chance." I stared at the screen, the words blurring in front of my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I had been isolating myself until now. My friends, my family, everyone was reaching out, and yet I was too scared to even explain what was happening. How could I tell them the truth without sounding insane? How could I explain this terror, this thing that seemed to be haunting me? But I had no time to think. The back door creaked, the sound so loud it felt like it echoed through the entire house. I froze again, my eyes fixed on the door. Was he trying to get in? I knew it was only a matter of time before it gave way. The locks were nothing but a temporary barrier. The door wasn't going to stop him. Nothing would. I ran to the back of the house, peering through the curtains. My breath hitched as I saw him. The man from the road. He was standing there, just beyond the porch, his silhouette nearly blending into the night. But it wasn't just him anymore. There were others. Shadows moved around him, their figures barely visible, but unmistakable. They weren't human. I couldn't tell what they were, but the way they moved, the way they shifted in and out of the shadows, made my skin crawl. I backed away from the window, my mind reeling. What was happening? Were these people, or was this something worse? I couldn't think straight. I couldn't breathe. The door handle rattled, then a bang, sharp, loud. My whole body tensed. He was inside. I ran to the front door, but as I grabbed the handle, something else happened. The power went out. Everything went dark. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking too much to keep a steady grip. I turned on the flashlight and scanned the room, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. My gaze landed on the door. It was still locked, but the sound of something scraping against the wood told me it wouldn't stay that way for long. The house felt smaller, more suffocating. I could feel the walls closing in on me. How long had I been trapped here, watching shadows creep across the floor, feeling the weight of his eyes on me? How much longer before I'd have to face him, them, head on? My phone buzzed again. Another message from Jessica. "Jared, please. This isn't funny anymore. I'm really worried about you." I stared at the words, but I couldn't respond. I didn't know what to say. The longer I stood there, the more the tension in my chest grew. My thoughts spun in a chaotic blur. What was I supposed to do now? The scratching sound at the door grew louder, sharper. Whatever was out there, it was closer now. I wasn't ready for this. The sound of scratching grew louder, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just at the door anymore. The house itself seemed to groan under the weight of whatever was outside, like it was alive, holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. I couldn't tell if it was my mind playing tricks on me, or if something truly was creeping through the walls, the floorboards, the air itself. I backed away from the door, trying to steady my breathing. The flashlight trembled in my hand. My legs felt weak, like they wouldn't hold me up much longer. I didn't know how much time had passed since the power had gone out. Everything felt distorted, slow, surreal. But the one thing I was sure of was that I was being watched, and then I heard it. A whisper. It was faint at first, just a breath of sound, like someone was standing right behind me, just out of sight. "Jared." I spun around, heart in my throat, but there was nothing. Only the empty, dark room. The flashlight beam bounced off the walls, making shadows dance like they were alive. The whisper came again, closer this time, as if it was inside my mind. Jared. I pressed my hand to my chest, my pulse thumping in my ears. I had to move. I had to get out. But where? The back door was already compromised. The front door. No way it would hold. Every exit felt like a trap. I turned, scrambling to grab anything I could use for protection. But my hands only found the cold metal of the flashlight. It wasn't enough. I needed something bigger, something to stop whatever was coming. My eyes darted to the kitchen, the knife block. I moved toward it, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if the very floor was holding me back. Just as I reached the kitchen counter, I heard a crash, a loud shattering noise from the living room, the sound of glass breaking, the windows, or the door. I didn't know, but I didn't have time to think. I grabbed the largest knife I could find and turned back toward the hallway. That's when I saw it. A shape, tall, looming, impossible, stood in the doorway, blocking my escape. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, that it was just another shadow. But no, it was real. He was real. The man, the one I had seen in the road. His grin was still there, that sickening smile that never seemed to fade, but his eyes, those eyes, they were different now. Empty, hollow, no longer human. And behind him, I could see others, shadows flickering in and out of existence, too fast to fully comprehend. Figures that moved with unnatural speed, jerking and twitching as they advanced. I stepped back, my breath shallow, the knife heavy in my hand. My mind was screaming at me to fight, to do something, but my body refused to obey. I couldn't move. Jared, the man said, his voice low and almost gentle. Too gentle. You didn't think you could run from me, did you? I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were locked in place, frozen by fear. My hand gripped the knife tighter, the steel cold against my palm. He took a slow step forward. You'll never escape me, Jared. You'll never be free. I wanted to say something, to fight back, to make him feel something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Every inch of me was terrified, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Then I heard something from behind him, a faint scratching, like nails dragging across the floor. Something was moving, creeping closer. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't human, and it was coming for me. The scratching grew louder, closer. My heart raced as I turned, but the moment I did, the door to the hallway burst open with a crash, sending splinters of wood flying. My breath caught in my throat. For a split second, I thought it was him, the man, coming to finish what he started. But it wasn't him. A figure stepped into the light, and for a moment, I could barely comprehend what I was seeing. It was a woman, pale, wild-eyed, her hair disheveled, and her clothes torn. She was covered in dirt, blood streaking down her face, and she moved like she'd been running for days. My first thought was relief. Someone else, a survivor. But the look in her eyes made me freeze. It was terror, pure and raw, and she was looking at me like I was the one who was going to hurt her. Her gaze darted to the man in the doorway. His smile widened, the sickening grin stretching further across his face. "No!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "You have to leave." I barely had time to process her words before she turned toward me. Panic etched in every feature. "He's not real, Jared. He's not what you think he is," she gasped, her breathing heavy and labored. "You have to run. Right now. He's not going to stop. Not until..." The man took a step forward, his presence nearly filling the room. The shadows behind him moved in time with him, like they were waiting for his command. His voice was calm, almost amused. "It's too late for that," he said, his grin widening. "She couldn't stop me, and neither will you." I felt a chill run through me. The woman wasn't just running from him. She was terrified of him, but not just of him. It was something else, something deeper. What was she trying to warn me about? What did she mean he wasn't what I thought? Before I could ask, she made a desperate move. She lunged forward, shoving me toward the stairs. "Go! Now!" she shouted, the force of her hands pushing me back. But just as quickly, she collapsed to the ground, her body jerking uncontrollably. She let out a strangled cry, her arms twitching, as if something invisible was pulling at her. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and in that instant, I understood. It wasn't just the man who was after me. It was the darkness itself. He wasn't a man. He wasn't human. He was something else entirely. Something that controlled the shadows, twisted them into his will. I tried to move, to help her, but my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen, watching as she writhed, unable to escape whatever hold he had on her. "Jared," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "I tried to warn you. He's been following you. For years." The room seemed to close in around me. Her words hung in the air, thick with dread. Years? What was she talking about? I'd never seen her before, never even heard of her. But there was no time to think. The shadows moved, and with them, the man. He stepped forward with unnatural speed, his body bending and twitching like a puppet on strings. His grin was like a mask now, a grotesque distortion of humanity. "You were always meant to be mine," he whispered, his voice low and cold. "And now, it's time to join us." I felt the air grow thick, heavier, suffocating. My body screamed at me to run, but the fear, this deep, paralyzing fear, kept me rooted to the spot. I wanted to fight, I wanted to scream, to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. The woman's body went still. Her eyes opened, empty and glazed over. "He's not a man, Jared," she murmured, the last of her strength slipping away. "He's death, and he's already claimed you." The man laughed softly, and the sound was like a crack of thunder in the silence. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch toward me, their fingers curling around the edges of the walls, creeping closer with every breath I took. I knew then, deep down, that I had no way out. The only thing I could do was face him, face whatever he was. But as I prepared to take one last stand, I heard something worse than his laughter, a voice. But it wasn't the man's, it wasn't the woman's, it was someone else. And it was coming from inside the walls. The voice from inside the walls sent a shiver down my spine, one so sharp it almost felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was louder, clearer, and as I strained to listen, I realized something terrifying. It was my own voice. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. The man, the thing in front of me, was still there, his sick grin never wavering. But now there was something different about him. He was more than just a predator. He was a puppet master, and the strings were tightening around my mind, pulling at the very fabric of my reality. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, the words coming out with a force I didn't know I had left. I brandished the knife, my hand trembling. "You're not real. This is all in my head." But as soon as the words left my mouth, the shadows around him shifted. They didn't just move, they danced. The walls seemed to breathe with them, like the house itself was alive. And then, the walls groaned. With a deafening crack, the walls split apart. What emerged was not a figure, but a feeling, a weight, a presence, a shadow so vast it swallowed everything around it. And there, at the center, was the woman who had been warning me. She was standing now, but her eyes were no longer filled with fear. They were empty, hollow. Her body moved jerkily, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled too tight. "She's not a survivor," the thing said, its voice dripping with cold amusement. "She was never alive to begin with." I stared at her, the realization sinking in like a stone in my chest. She was another part of him, a fragment of his influence, a piece of the darkness sent to confuse me, to push me into making a choice that would only feed his hunger. "No," I whispered, backing away, my hands shaking. "No, this can't be real." "Oh, it's very real," the man said, his voice impossibly calm, considering everything happening around us. "I've been in your mind from the beginning, Jared. I've been waiting for you to understand." I tried to look away, but my gaze kept returning to her, to the emptiness in her eyes. She had been a part of the trap all along. She wasn't warning me. She was trying to trap me. The shadows moved again, faster this time, wrapping themselves around me. My chest tightened, the air growing thick, suffocating. My breath came in ragged gasps as the house itself seemed to press in on me, the walls closing in, and I realized I was losing myself. I was no longer in control. He was in control. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't being hunted. I had been hunted long ago. I was never meant to escape. This house, this nightmare, this thing, it had been waiting for me to break, waiting for me to give in. I took a deep breath, summoning whatever strength was left in me. The man stepped closer, his face inches from mine. I could feel the weight of his presence, the suffocating cold that radiated from him. "Do you understand now, Jared?" he murmured. "You've always belonged to me. This has always been your fate." I raised the knife, my hand trembling, but there was no hesitation in my movements anymore. I knew what I had to do. The woman, no, the thing inside her, stared at me, her eyes wide, unblinking. I plunged the knife into her chest, and as it sank in, I felt the house tremble beneath my feet. For a moment, everything went still. And then it happened. The walls, the shadows, the darkness, everything collapsed. The house cracked apart, the very foundations shaking, as if everything that had been built around me was nothing but a lie. The man, the thing, screeched, a sound so inhuman it made my blood run cold. The woman's body crumbled to the ground, lifeless, and the shadows began to dissipate. The oppressive weight lifted, but the air still felt thick with something I couldn't shake. I stood there, panting, staring at the wreckage around me. The man, whatever he was gone. The house was silent now, eerily quiet, but I knew better than to think it was over. As I stepped back, I heard something, a faint whisper, growing louder, echoing in the ruins. It was my voice again, but this time, it wasn't coming from anywhere. It was inside me. "You thought you escaped, didn't you?" The words were cold, familiar. I turned to run, but the house, the darkness, followed. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping on the debris that littered the floor. The house around me felt like it was breathing, like the walls were shifting, closing in. The whisper, the sound of my own voice, grew louder, filling my head, filling every inch of the room. It wasn't just the darkness that I had to escape now. It was myself. The voice wasn't just mimicking me anymore. It was me. The realization struck with the force of a slap to the face. The man, the shadows, the woman, they weren't outside of me. They were inside me, part of me, a part of my mind that I'd buried deep. For years, I'd lived with the fear, the anxiety, the guilt, and now I was seeing what I had unknowingly allowed to grow inside. It wasn't just some nightmare or paranormal entity. It was the darkest parts of me, the twisted thoughts and regrets that I hadn't faced. I took a deep breath and steadied myself, ignoring the searing pain in my shoulder where the bite still burned. That voice. It had haunted me for so long, but now I understood. It wasn't about escaping it. It was about accepting it. The darkness I feared, the thing I thought I was running from, it had always been a reflection of me. I had created it, and I was the only one who could stop it. I turned toward the wreckage, the shadows receding like smoke into the air. The house was still there, but it no longer felt like it had a hold on me. It was just an empty shell, a place that had once been alive with my fear. And now, it was just a house again, a place where I could make a choice. With the last of my strength, I walked through the destruction. The cold air from the broken windows blew in, a stark reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. But as I moved toward the door, I felt something shift within me. The weight that had been pressing on me for so long was lifting, little by little. The shadows weren't gone entirely, but they no longer held the power they once did. They were just shadows. And I was finally free. I stepped outside into the quiet night, the cool air biting against my skin. The moon hung high, casting a soft, pale light across the wreckage of the house. I had survived, yes, but I had also learned something crucial. The battle hadn't been against a man, or a monster, or an entity beyond my understanding. It had been against myself, against the fears and regrets I had allowed to define me. The darkness wasn't some force out there. It was the part of me I hadn't faced, the part that I needed to confront before I could truly be free. As I stood there, looking at the ruins of what had once been my life, I realized that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The beginning of facing the things I had buried deep, of confronting the parts of myself I had refused to acknowledge. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be the only way to find peace. The silence that filled the air now felt different. It wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't need to run anymore. Whatever shadows followed me, I knew I could face them. And that thought, that knowledge, was enough to make me believe that I was free. Free from the darkness that had once controlled me. As I walked away from the house, the world around me seemed quieter, calmer. I wasn't running anymore. I was moving forward,